They say wild things can't love you back. But I remember the first time he curled up on the old quilt by the hearth, just inches from my boots. So small, singed whiskers still brittle with soot. Bones trembling, but his golden eyes locked onto mine, like he'd known me in another life.
Safe for her here.
That quilt had belonged to my wife. It hadn't left the cedar chest since she passed. Until that night. His name was Ash. I didn't give it to him. Not right away. Names carry weight. And something about him, he felt borrowed from the storm. A shadow trailing behind something broken. I wasn't looking to save anything. Not since Marlene died. But let me start at the beginning. It was the third night of the Thunderhead blaze. The worst fire our mountain valley had seen in 20 years. I was one of the few who stayed behind. Stubborn, maybe. Or maybe just too tired to run again. My cabin, tucked in near Pine Creek Ridge, had a defensible perimeter. I'd cleared the brush myself, stone by stone all summer. That stubbornness likely saved us both. The air was an awful kind of silent. Smoke-drenched snow fell like ash-colored confetti. No birdsong, no distant barking, just the hissing crackle of what hadn't yet burned. That's when I found him. I'd been checking the far fence line, making sure no embers had jumped the trench, heard a sound. Not quite a cry, more like a broken purr, low and labored. I followed it. What I saw barely made sense. A half-collapsed shed, burned on one side, and under a melted tarp, something was twitching. I moved slow. I know better than to lunge at wild things. But this one didn't run. Couldn't. A bobcat kitten, no more than 4 weeks old, legs splayed awkward and fur crusted with soot. His left ear was half singed, his breath wheezed. But what struck me most was the way he looked up. Not in fear, but in confusion. Like he was asking me where his world had gone. He tried to stand, collapsed. Tried again. Then, without sound or warning, he took 2 shaking steps and leaned into my boot. That was the first cliff in my soul. I wrapped him in my flannel. The same one Marlene used to steal from my closet each winter. The one I hadn't worn since the funeral. I don't know why I grabbed it. Maybe I wanted him to feel something human, something warm. Back at the cabin, I didn't put him in a cage. I don't own cages anymore. After 30 years in wildlife rehab and ranger patrol, I've seen what confinement does. No, I made a nest near the hearth. Old quilt, shallow bowl of water, milk replacer warmed in a mason jar. I didn't expect him to make it through the night, but he did. When I woke near dawn, he was nestled against the flannel, purring like a tractor under his breath. That was the moment I knew. He'd chosen me, and I'd already failed to keep my distance. I didn't tell the rangers, not yet. I knew the rules. Bobcats, even kits, were tagged for release or transfer. But something about Ash felt like unfinished business, like I was being handed a second chance. The next day, the fire crept closer. We prepped for evac. June, my niece, arrived, unexpected and in tears. She'd just come from burying her mother, my sister. And fate, it seemed, wasn't done spinning its strange little web. Because 2 days later, June found something else by the edge of the fire line. Something that would change everything. June had always been sharp-eyed, like her mother. She didn't cry often, not since she was a little girl. But I could see something had cracked open in her when she stepped through the door that morning. Face smudged with ash, ponytail frizzed from heat. She held something close to her chest, wrapped in a wool blanket from my truck. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. In her arms was a fawn, maybe 4, 5 days old. Spindly legs folded tight, eyes dark and wet like it had seen too much already. Its back bore a patch of charred fur, and every few seconds it flinched like it expected the fire to come roaring back. I reached out. My hands, steady from decades of handling wild creatures, hesitated now. There was a fragility in that little body that shook me. Not just physical, something deeper. This wasn't a rescue. It was a heartbreak wrapped in fur. "Where'd you find it?" She swallowed. "Down by Larkspur Hollow, near that old ranger shed. It was standing in the road, just waiting." It didn't make sense. A fawn that young should have been hidden, motionless, tucked away while its mother foraged. For it to be alone, exposed, near fire? It had been abandoned, or worse. I cleared a space in the cabin, near the same hearth where Ash now dozed, his breathing shallow but steady. We laid the fawn down, and for a while, just watched it breathe. Ash stirred. He rose slowly, shaking off sleep, his tiny claws clicking softly on the wood floor. Then, in a moment I still don't understand, he padded toward the fawn. I sat up, hand instinctively going to block him. But June grabbed my wrist. "Wait," she said. "Look." Ash didn't hiss, didn't growl. He sniffed the fawn once, then circled it like a cat testing warm laundry. With a soft grunt, he curled beside it, nose tucked under its chin. The fawn flinched, then melted. Literally melted into the kitten's side, exhaling a sound like a sigh, caught between exhaustion and relief. It was the quietest kind of miracle. That night, I sat up by the fire, watching them sleep on the old quilt. June dozed in the rocker, arms crossed, as the firelight flickered shadows along the walls. I thought of Marlene, of the doe she'd raised from a fawn 20 years ago, after a late spring snow had separated it from the herd. She named it Lily, fed it with a bottle every 3 hours. The animal followed her like a dog, slept by her garden bench, once even nudged open the screen door to sit beside her during a thunderstorm. I remember her saying, "Grief breaks the rules, Ray. So does love." Back then, I thought she meant people. Now I wasn't so sure. Because what I was watching on that quilt wasn't just a fluke of survival. It was something else, something deeper. By dawn, they were inseparable. Ash would bat gently at the fawn's ears. The fawn, June had started calling her Remy, would groom his ears in return, like she'd decided she was part mother, or maybe part pack, maybe just not alone. We gave them space. I called in a favor from an old contact at the Fish and Wildlife Office and requested a delay on reporting them. Technically, it wasn't allowed. But sometimes bureaucracy has to take a back seat to mercy. I reinforced the spare room into a soft pen. Blankets, hay, pine boughs. Ash and Remy slept in a tangle of limbs each night. Their rhythms synced like clock hands. I'd never seen anything like it. And for a while, I let myself believe it could last. But in the woods, things grow. And wild hearts remember who they are. Ash's eyes started to change. The soft kitten blue faded into a wild, gold-amber hue. His shoulders bulked. His paws, once clumsy and oversized, now moved with intention. And every now and then, he'd stare out the cabin window for long stretches. Ears pricked, tail twitching. He was remembering the forest. And I was remembering what it meant to lose something you love. Twice. Ash began to change in ways only time and nature can explain. His body filled out, lean muscle forming beneath his coat like wind-shaping stone. The roundness of kittenhood faded. His steps became deliberate, His claws no longer retracted absent-mindedly, but extended with purpose, especially when a drifting leaf dared land too close. Yet with Remy, he was still gentle. She too was growing. Her legs gained confidence, no longer trembling beneath her weight. She started bounding in small arcs around the cabin yard, tail flicking like a ribbon. Ash would chase her, not with the hunger of a predator, but with the reckless joy of a sibling. They were wild and wrong, beautiful and doomed. And watching them play in the golden light of a mountain autumn, I felt both pride and dread knotted inside my chest. You see, animals like them weren't meant to share space, let alone comfort. One afternoon, as the last orange leaves danced across the ridge, I found Ash crouched in the tall grass behind the shed. Still as stone, his golden eyes tracking a junco flitting between brush. He didn't pounce, didn't chase, just watched. But it was the first time I saw distance in his gaze. Like he was looking at a world beyond me, beyond the cabin, beyond Remy. That night, I sat on the porch with a thermos of black coffee and a memory I hadn't touched in years. Marlene once said, "You can love something wild, but you can't hold it back. Love without freedom is just another kind of cage." She'd meant me. I'd spent too long in ranger posts, fire towers, and field trucks, trying to keep the world from breaking. But I couldn't stop time, and I sure couldn't stop instincts. I looked through the window. Ash was curled next to Remy on the quilt, their breathing synced, just like always. But he twitched now in his sleep, the way cats do when they dream of hunting. And in that moment, I knew. The bond wasn't permanent. It was precious because it was passing. The next morning, I called June out to the trail behind the cabin. "I want you to see something," I said. We hiked in silence for a mile, the trail coated in early frost. Chickadees chirped like whispers. When we reached the overlook above Pine Creek Valley, I stopped. "It's time," I said. She didn't answer at first, just stared out over the trees, her arms crossed against the cold. Finally, she whispered, "They'll forget each other, won't they?" I didn't lie. Most likely. That's how it's supposed to be. "But they're not supposed to be anything," she shot back. "None of this was supposed to happen. And yet, it did." She was right. Nature had broken its own rules to let these two bond. But now, we had to honor the ones that remained. That night, I left the door open a crack. Ash didn't leave. But he didn't sleep next to Remy either. He curled on the flannel shirt near the door, eyes watching the trees, waiting. A part of him was already gone. And I sat there on the rocker till dawn, wondering how many goodbyes a man could survive in one lifetime. The fire was mostly out now. Rain had come, snow was whispering up the mountains again. And the world, in its relentless, indifferent way, was moving on. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because some part of me still hoped, against everything I knew, that maybe Ash would choose to stay. That love, this time, might be enough to rewrite the ending. Winter came early that year. Not with fanfare or blizzard, but with a soft, steady hush. Like the world was tucking itself in. The first snow fell in whispers, coating the pine needles, dusting the old woodpile out back. I watched it from the porch, mug in hand, as Ash padded through the white like it was part of him. He didn't shiver, didn't flinch. He moved with the quiet knowing of a creature born for frost. Remy, on the other hand, danced. She pranced through the snowdrifts like a child discovering magic. Her hooves kicked up little puffs of powder, her tail flicking with glee. Ash would follow her at a distance, ears perked, his body tense but unthreatening. I watched them from the porch, my heart a complicated thing. That same week, a letter arrived. Typed, official. Sealed in a government envelope that hadn't touched my mailbox in years. It was from Montana Wildlife Services. They'd heard about the Thunderhead blaze, the influx of displaced animals, and were offering relocation assistance for non-releasables and monitored return programs for those ready to go back. They wanted to evaluate both Ash and Remy. I folded the letter once, twice, set it in the drawer where I kept Marlene's scarf and my ranger badge. I wasn't ready. That night, Ash did something strange. I'd left my flannel shirt, Marlene's old favorite, on the floor near the hearth. When I went to pick it up, I found Ash curled around it, his paws kneading it gently. Not playful, not rough, almost reverent. I sat beside him on the floor, cross-legged like a child. He blinked at me slowly, then lowered his head onto the flannel. No sound, no movement, just trust. Sometimes grief finds its way into the body, into muscle memory, scent, the pull of fabric. Sometimes it lingers in ways we don't understand. June noticed too. She'd taken to sketching them, Ash and Remy, in charcoal and pencil. Her drawings covered the cabin walls. In one, Ash rested his chin on Remy's back as she lay curled like a comma. In another, they stood side by side at the edge of the tree line, eyes watching something unseen. I asked her once what she was drawing when she stared out the window so long. "Not them," she said. "You." I didn't answer. What do you say to that? A week passed, then 2. Ash started hunting again. Mice, a rabbit, once a jaybird. He never brought the kills near the cabin, never showed aggression toward Remy. But the shift was clear. The wild was no longer whispering to him. It was calling. One morning, I found Remy alone near the edge of the yard. She paced, ears twitching. No Ash. I followed the tracks. They led east into the trees. Not far, maybe a quarter mile. I found him there, perched on a low branch, eyes locked on a rustle in the brush. When he saw me, he didn't leap down, didn't approach, just blinked. Once, then vanished. That was the second crack. I returned to the cabin, told June it was time. She didn't argue. We made the call. Wildlife Services sent a transport team. They'd help prep Remy for release into the lower valley where other rescued fawns had been reintroduced. Ash would need evaluation, but they agreed. His behavior suggested a clean return was possible. The day before they arrived, I stayed up late. Ash curled beside me on the floor. Remy lay by the hearth, her breathing slow. I leaned back in the rocker and watched the fire dim to embers. "Ash," I whispered, "you've been a good boy." He opened one eye. "If you remember anything," I said, "remember the flannel. Remember the warmth. That's all any of us really need." He stood, walked over to the chair, and placed one paw gently on my chest. No claws, just weight. It was the first time he'd ever done that, and it was the last night we spent under the same roof. Morning broke gray and windless. The transport team arrived just after sunrise. 2 trucks, a quiet-spoken handler named Marcus, and a woman with kind eyes called Leah. They brought insulated crates, paperwork, soft halters, all clean, efficient, humane. But to me, it still felt like eviction. June helped load Remy first. The fawn resisted, but only gently, as if she sensed something beyond the metal ramp, something like instinct or goodbye. I stood back, arms folded, watching her disappear into the crate's quiet darkness. Then came Ash. He was harder to find. Not gone, just watching from the woods, as he often did now. I whistled once, low and familiar. He emerged a moment later, slow, cautious, head low. He didn't fight, didn't flinch. When Leah knelt and opened the side of the carrier, Ash walked in on his own. But before the door closed, he looked back. Right at me. That stare, wide, golden, endless. It hit something ancient inside me. A grief I didn't know had words. He didn't cry, didn't growl. But in that moment, I swear I heard him say something without sound. Is this the part where you stop being mine? I turned away. The trucks rumbled down the trail, tires crunching frost. Then silence. Back inside, the cabin felt colder than it should have. The quilt lay in a heap. The flannel shirt untouched. June sat at the kitchen table, mug in hand. "They'll be okay," she said. I nodded. But I didn't feel it. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak in the wood, every gust against the shutters, felt like something was missing. The fire flickered, but the warmth didn't reach me. I kept thinking of the way Ash had placed his paw on my chest, like a goodbye, like a blessing. The next week passed slowly. I called the service center twice. They said Remy had been released with a group near the river trail and was adapting well. Ash, they said, had passed evaluation and would be transported deeper into the mountains for final release. They praised his health, his instincts, his readiness. "He didn't imprint too deeply," Marcus said. "That's rare. You must have done something right." I didn't answer. How do you explain that doing something right sometimes means tearing something out of your own chest? The day they released him, I didn't ask for details. I didn't want coordinates. Didn't want to picture it. But I did anyway. I imagined the crate opening, the hush of tall grass, the pause before freedom. I imagined Ash stepping out, slow and silent, his body coiled with purpose, his ears tuned to the pulse of the earth. I imagined him turning once, just once, before vanishing into the trees. And that night, I left the flannel shirt on the porch rail, not because I thought he'd come back, but because some part of me still believed he might remember. 2 days passed, then 3. No signs, no tracks. I stopped watching the tree line. Winter thickened. The wind sang through the pines like mourning. Then, on the 5th night, it happened. I opened the cabin door just before bed. More habit than hope. And there, on the porch, laid something small and familiar. The flannel shirt, folded, and on top of it rested Ash's collar. Nothing else, no prints, no scratches, just silence and snow, and a message I felt more than heard. I remember. That was the twist I never expected, the kind that doesn't break you, just rearranges the way your heart beats. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with the collar in my hands, the scent of pine and cold smoke lingering in the air. The flannel lay beside me, now stiff from frost, but I didn't move it, didn't cover it up. It felt like a grave marker and a gift all at once. Ash had found his way back, not to stay, but to say goodbye. That mattered more than I could explain. June woke before dawn and found me out there. She stood in the doorway wrapped in her mother's old coat, watching me in silence. Then she stepped onto the porch, took one look at the collar in my hands, and sank down beside me. "He came back," she whispered. I nodded. He remembered. We sat that way for a long time, wrapped in the hush of early morning snowfall. The sun broke over the ridge slow and red, painting the world in soft gold. Later, I placed the collar on the mantel, next to Marlene's photo. She'd loved symbols, kept feathers, acorns, stones from trails we hiked. She believed the earth left breadcrumbs if you paid attention. This one, I think, would have meant everything to her. The cabin grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not hollow, just still. A few days later, I took a walk down to the old ranger shed, the one where Ash had first found me. The woods were clean now, healed. The fire scars fading into new growth. Deer tracks lined the edge of the creek, and in the distance, I heard the cry of a hawk. At the shed's edge, tucked beneath a split rail, I saw something that stopped me cold. A feather. Black-tipped, gray at the base. Bobcat fur tangled in a tuft nearby. And just beyond that, fawn prints, side by side. I crouched, ran my hand over the earth, and felt that familiar pulse beneath my fingers. The one Marlene used to talk about. The heartbeat of the mountain. That night, I lit a fire and sat with June at the kitchen table. She was sketching again, this time not from memory, not from observation, just from something deeper. In the drawing, a bobcat and a doe stood on opposite sides of a stream, eyes locked. Between them, snowflakes fell like secrets. And in the background, a man watched, his hand resting on an old quilt. "Is that me?" I asked. She smiled, nodded. "You look younger in this," I said. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Maybe it's the way they saw you." I swallowed hard, blinked down the sting in my eyes. "You think they remember each other?" I asked. June set her pencil down. "I think they remember the feeling. That kind of bond. It doesn't vanish. It just changes form." I stared into the fire. She was right. We don't forget what saves us. We just carry it forward, tucked behind ribs and memory, and the way we stand when we're alone. The days turned slower after that. The snow deepened. The cabin returned to its old rhythm. Quiet, predictable. But I felt different, like something had clicked into place. I started carving again. Wood, antler. I hadn't touched my tools since Marlene passed, but my hands remembered, and in each curve I found echoes. One afternoon I carved a small bobcat. Not realistic, just enough to remember him by. I placed it on the windowsill beside the flannel, a small sentinel. And every once in a while, when the wind blew a certain way, I swore I heard the crunch of soft paws in snow, or the hush of breath beside a sleeping hearth. Memory's a funny thing. It doesn't fade. It waits. Spring came slowly, as it always does in the high country. The thaw was patient, careful, like it understood how much needed healing. The creek behind the cabin unfroze in pieces. First a trickle, then a voice, then a song. The snow melted into soft, stubborn mud. And with it came birdsong, deer trails, the scent of pine waking up. I started walking the ridge again. Not for patrol, not for routine, just to listen. One morning, I followed a path I hadn't walked since Marlene's last summer. It led through switchbacks above the canyon where Remy had been released. I didn't expect to see her. She'd be grown by now, cautious like any wild deer. But still, something in me hoped. Halfway up the ridge, I found a spot where the brush had been trampled flat, fresh. A cluster of white fur snagged on the bark. And, beside it, bobcat tracks, not deep enough for a full-grown male, not fresh enough to follow, but they were real. They'd been there. Maybe not together, maybe not at the same time, but close. I crouched down, ran my fingers along the edge of the track. The wind picked up, brought with it the faintest sound, so soft I thought I imagined it. A cry. Not a distress call, not a warning, a greeting. That afternoon, I came home and pulled down the old cedar box from the shelf. Inside were Marlene's keepsakes, her pressed flowers, trail maps, and the small, worn journal she carried on every hike. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside the cover, she'd written something I'd forgotten. When you feel the earth breathe, it means something you love is still near. I didn't cry. Not then. But I sat on the porch for a long time, staring out at the hills, the collar still resting beside me like a relic. Later that week, June left. She had interviews in Missoula, art school visits, a life pulling her forward. We didn't say goodbye. Not really. She just hugged me hard, looked at the carvings lining the windowsill and said, "You should tell someone this story." I shrugged. "I'm not much of a storyteller." She smiled. "You don't have to be. The story already knows how to speak." Then she was gone, her car winding down the gravel like a memory fading into distance. I went back inside, sat by the fire, watched the flames dance, and for the first time in years, I reached for a pen, started to write. Not for anyone else, just to remember. Ash, Remy, the fire, the snow, the bond that made no sense and still somehow held everything together. And the lesson I never expected to learn this late in life. That love is not about holding on. It's about letting wild things find their way and hoping they remember the warmth that waited for them when the world burned. I paused, looked at the last line I'd written. Then I added one more. Sometimes, the wild doesn't forget you either. Outside, the wind shifted. I thought I heard soft paws on the step. But maybe it was just the fire sighing. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a ghost with golden eyes, checking in one last time. I kept the porch light on for weeks after. Not out of superstition, not even out of hope, just habit. It became part of the rhythm. Wake early, chop wood, brew coffee, walk the ridge, check the snow for tracks, write a little, sleep, repeat. Grief had its own pace up here. It moved with the trees, settled in the floorboards. It didn't vanish, just changed shape. Like steam rising off the kettle. Ash never came back again, not in body, but in memory. He was everywhere. The shelf of carvings growing longer by the week. The quilt folded neatly near the hearth. The flannel shirt still draped across the porch rail like a flag left flying. I'd taken to carving at night. The hush of the room, a kind of comfort, bears, elk, mountain lions. But I kept coming back to him, Ash. I must have carved him a dozen times, each version slightly different. One with his head tilted, another mid-pounce. One of him curled beside a sleeping fawn, both peaceful in their impossible stillness. One evening, I carved something new. A scene I hadn't witnessed, but had always imagined. Ash and Remy on a ridge at dusk, standing side by side, silhouettes against the rising moon. I didn't need reference photos. The picture lived in me, whole and clear. I placed it beside the mantel, right next to Marlene's photo. The cabin felt fuller that night, like time had folded in on itself, and everyone I'd ever loved was sitting quietly beside me, warming their hands by the same fire. I started leaving small offerings in the woods. Just little things, bits of meat wrapped in linen, an apple sliced in quarters, a carving set on a stump, a thank you note scribbled and tucked in a hollow log. Not because I believed they'd be found, but because I believed they mattered. June called sometimes. She was doing well, learning to draw light like it was something alive. She told me one of her sketches, Ash resting on the flannel, had been accepted into a gallery show. People said it felt like a prayer, she told me. It was, I said. Months passed. Then one morning, near the edge of the Lower Valley Trail, I saw something that made me stop cold. A set of tracks, not fresh, but distinct. Bobcat prints, clean, purposeful. Beside them, deer tracks, not crossing, not staggered, parallel. I crouched low, studied them. There was a rhythm to the spacing, as if they'd been moving together, side by side. Not chasing, not fleeing, just moving. My breath caught. Couldn't be. And yet, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small wooden carving I'd brought for the ridge. The one of Ash standing tall, tail curled, ears sharp. I placed it gently between the prints, pressing it into the snow like a seal. "Go well, little brother," I whispered. Then I stood and walked home slowly, the silence around me a kind of hymn. Somewhere in the trees, a jaybird cried. Somewhere in the sky, clouds parted. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt witnessed, like the mountain itself had seen the whole thing and chosen to remember. As spring turned to summer, the mountain began to hum again. Not loudly, not like the city's rush or the wild crescendo of storms, but with that soft, steady rhythm only a quiet life can hear. Pine needles whispering, bees drifting through blooming fireweed. The low babble of the creek weaving its way through stone. My days settled into a pattern as steady as breath. Wake, write, walk, carve, repeat. But every so often, something would break that rhythm. A flash of movement in the trees, the rustle of leaves in perfect silence. A shadow at twilight that lingered too long. I never saw him. Not fully. But I felt him. Like a memory brushing past your shoulder. And in those moments, I knew Ash was out there, living his life, hunting, climbing, wild and free, just as he was meant to be. But still remembering, in some impossible way, that once there was a man in a flannel shirt who didn't cage him, who didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was. That kind of memory sticks. It carves itself into the bones. I got a letter that summer. From Leah, the handler with kind eyes who'd helped with Ash's release. She said she'd been monitoring the Ridgeline trail cams for other projects, and one of them caught something strange. A bobcat, large, healthy, alone, and walking directly beside a young doe. She sent the photo. Grainy, faint, but unmistakable. Their shadows overlapped like a braid. Their bodies moved like music. Not predator and prey, not even companions, just belonging. She ended the letter with one line. "We didn't believe it until we saw it. Thought you might want to know." I read that letter over and over. Then I slipped it into Marlene's journal, beneath the feather, and pressed lavender she'd once collected from the southern ridge. I didn't tell June right away. I waited until she came to visit late that August, her sketch pad full, her smile looser than I'd ever seen it. We sat on the porch that night, listening to the crickets tune their legs. "I still think about them," she said. "Every time I draw, it's like they left something in me." I handed her the letter. She read it once, then again, and without a word she reached into her bag, pulled out a sheet of paper, and showed me her latest sketch. It was them, Ash, Remy, together, walking toward the trees, their figures soft, fading at the edges, as if they were returning to the earth they came from. Above them, she'd written, "Some wild things don't forget. Some loves aren't lost. They just live where we can't always follow. I didn't speak, just took her hand. And for a long time, neither of us moved. The stars came out, one by one, unbothered by human sorrow. And I thought, maybe that's the secret. Not keeping what you love, just recognizing it when it chooses to return. Even if only for a moment, even if only in the silence between footsteps. The first frost came early that fall. I felt it in my knees before it touched the ground, a kind of knowing that settles in the joints before it paints the windows. I pulled the flannel from the porch rail, shook out the dust, and wore it again for the first time in months. It still smelled like pine smoke and something wilder, like memory. The cabin was quiet now. June had gone back to the city, chasing her future with charcoal-stained fingers and a sketchbook full of ghosts. But the silence didn't ache anymore. It felt whole. I still walked the ridge most mornings, still left the occasional scrap, the small carving, the quiet offering tucked beneath a cedar, not as a lure, not even as a thank you, just a reminder that someone remembered. One morning, near the first snow, I found a feather on the windowsill, black-tipped, smooth, deliberately placed. No wind could have put it there. I smiled, didn't say a word, just placed it gently beside Ash's carving. That evening, I sat by the fire and opened Marlene's journal one last time. I added a note to the final page, my handwriting slower now, but sure. Sometimes, grief isn't what we carry. It's what we release, and what finds its way back when we do. I closed the book, set it on the mantel. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet, persistent, soft as breath. And in the hush of the mountain night, I heard it. A slow, deliberate step on the porch boards. Then another. No knock, no cry, just presence. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Instead, I placed another log on the fire, poured a second cup of coffee, and left the flannel folded on the quilt beside the hearth. A gesture. A welcome. For whatever part of him still wandered, or returned, or simply remembered. Because in the end, that's all any of us want, isn't it? Not to be held forever, just to be remembered by the ones who let us go. And to know, in some deep part of the wild, they still keep a light on for us, just in case we ever find our way home.